After co-signing the loan that made my brother rich, he cut me from his lavish wedding. I took a vacation instead. Now the wedding is in ruins, the groom is gone, and my phone won't stop ringing. My world has always been built on numbers, on the elegant certainty of a balanced ledger. As a financial risk analyst, I don't just appreciate order, I require it. It's a professional necessity that long ago bled into my personal life. My apartment is a testament to this. A minimalist space of clean lines, muted colors, and surfaces clear of clutter. There's a place for everything, and everything is in its place. It's quiet, it's controlled, and for 38 years, it has been my sanctuary. It was in this sanctuary, surrounded by the predictable hum of my computer, that the first tremor of chaos arrived. It wasn't a loud intrusion, but a subtle vibration in the orderly framework of my life. The upcoming wedding of my younger brother, Marcus. I was proud of him, truly. His tech startup, once a pipe dream sketched on a bar napkin, was now a bona fide success story. He had the dazzling fiancée, the sprawling suburban house, and the kind of casual wealth that I, with my steady salary and meticulous 401k contributions, could only view from a distance. But beneath the pride, a quiet wariness had taken root. I saw the flashy cars, the designer clothes, and I couldn't help but run the numbers. It felt aspirational, over-leveraged, but I'd always been the anchor for his kite. That was my role. It was a role I formally accepted 5 years ago, not in a boardroom, but at my parents' cluttered kitchen table. Marcus, buzzing with a nervous energy that made the silverware rattle, had been pitching his idea. My father, a man who trusts pensions and distrusts anything that doesn't come with a manual, had been skeptical. "Another one of your schemes, Marcus?" He'd sighed, polishing his glasses. "When are you going to get a real job?" My mother had just wrung her hands, offering him more coffee as if caffeine could solve a lack of collateral. They didn't see it, but I did. I'd stayed up with Marcus for 3 nights straight, tearing apart his business plan, stress-testing his projections, and rebuilding it on a foundation of solid data. It was still a risk, a huge one. I remember the silence after my father's dismissal. Marcus's face fell, the light in his eyes dimming. I slid the polished business plan back across the table. "The data says this is a long shot," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air. I turned to Marcus, ignoring my parents. "But I'm not betting on the data. I'm betting on you." The memory is still crystal clear. The sterile quiet of the bank, the slick feel of the loan documents, the almost imperceptible tremble in my hand as I signed my name next to his on the cosigner line. A $150,000 risk. An act of faith that went against every principle of my profession. My one great deviation from the ledger. That signature had funded the company that was now funding his lavish wedding, which is why the text message that lit up my phone screen felt like a physical blow. It wasn't a call. It wasn't even a personal note. It was a sterile, corporate-sounding text from Marcus. "Hey man, Brianna and I finalized the guest list. Had to make some really tough cuts. Hope you get it." I read it once, then twice. The words hung in the quiet air of my orderly apartment, utterly devoid of logic. Tough cuts. I wasn't a distant cousin. I wasn't a forgotten college friend. I was the founding investor. I was his brother, and I had just been written off the books. My first instinct was to call Marcus, to demand an explanation in the direct, unfiltered way we used to speak. But something stopped me. This felt different. This had the sterile, manicured feel of his fiancée, Brianna. So I called the one person I thought would give me the unvarnished truth, my mother. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and breezy. "Julian, honey, how are you?" "I'm confused, Mom," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "I just had a text from Marcus. He says I'm not invited to the wedding." A pause. It was just long enough to confirm my worst fears. Then the sigh. It was a sound I knew well, a soft exhalation of air designed to make me feel like I was being unreasonable. "Oh, Julian," she began, her voice taking on that gentle, placating tone. "Don't make a big deal of this. You know how weddings are. Brianna has a very specific vision, and they're on a terribly tight budget." The word budget sent a hot spike of anger through my chest. It was so absurd, so utterly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. Budget, I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Mom, are you listening to yourself? I co-signed the $150,000 loan that is the budget. The company that's paying for this specific vision wouldn't exist without me. How in God's name am I a tough cut? Now, that was business, this is family, she chided, as if the two were completely separate worlds. There's no need to bring up money. You're being so cold and calculating, Julian. Your brother is under a lot of stress. The last thing he needs is his older brother complaining about an invitation. Cold and calculating. The words hit me not as an insult, but as a clarification. For years, they had benefited from my cold and calculating nature. My ability to manage my money had meant I always had a few $100s to spare when Marcus inevitably overspent his. My calm, analytical approach had been the steady hand that guided him through every crisis, from failed exams to failed relationships. They relied on my responsible nature, yet they resented it. It was a utility, a tool to be used, and then put away when it wasn't needed for the prettier, more exciting project that was Marcus. And now, they were using my greatest act of faith, that massive, uncalculated risk I took on him, as a mere business transaction, a historical footnote with no bearing on the present. They had devalued my investment, both financial and emotional, to zero. I see, I said, and the iciness in my own voice surprised me. Good, my mother said, relieved. I knew you'd understand. You've always been the sensible one. Yes, I said, a strange clarity washing over me. I am. I ended the call without another word. I stood in the center of my quiet living room, the silence buzzing in my ears. They wanted me to be cold and calculating? Fine. It was time I started running the numbers on my own life. It was time for a full-scale audit of my personal investments. And my portfolio, I realized, was dangerously overexposed in one very toxic asset. My laptop was on the coffee table. I flipped it open, the screen illuminating my face in the dimming afternoon light. The search engine blinked expectantly. My fingers, steady and deliberate, typed in a new destination. Not for a spreadsheet, not for a report, but for an escape. The screen glowed with an impossible shade of blue. A luxury eco-lodge in Costa Rica, nestled between a private beach and a protected rainforest. Infinity pool. Private balcony with a volcanic view. All-inclusive. It was the kind of trip I'd filed away in a mental folder labeled for retirement, or if I win the lottery. It was an irrational expense, a flagrant deviation from the sensible path I'd meticulously paved for myself. It was perfect. My fingers moved with an unnatural speed, navigating booking forms, selecting the best suite, adding the airport transfer in a stylish black SUV. The total at the bottom of the page was obscene. It was a number that made the sensible, risk-averse part of my brain scream in protest. For 2 weeks. The exact 2 weeks that would encompass Marcus's wedding weekend. The cursor blinked, a tiny vertical line hovering over the bold, orange button, confirm and pay. And then I hesitated. My hand froze over the trackpad. Was this me? Was this who I was? A man who would spend a small fortune on a trip born of spite? The anger that had been a roaring fire in my chest for the past hour suddenly subsided, leaving behind a cold, hollow ache. I felt pathetic, childish. You're being dramatic, my mother's voice echoed in my head. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was just throwing an expensive tantrum. I pushed back from the coffee table and walked aimlessly around my apartment, the silence pressing in. My gaze fell on a bookshelf, and on it, a single, non-essential item, a small, silver-plated frame. I picked it up. The photo was faded, the colors muted by 2 decades of sunlight. It was me around 10 years old, with a scrawny, gap-toothed Marcus, not yet 7, slung around my shoulders. We were in matching Little League uniforms, caked in dirt. I was holding a cheap, plastic trophy, but I was looking at Marcus, a wide, protective grin on my face. He was looking at the camera, beaming, feeling safe. A wave of grief, so sharp and unexpected it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. This was what they were taking from me. Not a seat at a wedding. Not a slice of cake. They were taking this. The unspoken contract of that photograph. The fundamental belief that we were a team, that I would always be in his corner, holding him up. I sank onto the sofa, the photo cold in my hand. Was I really going to burn that bridge over this? Maybe I should just call him. Try to talk it out. Be the bigger person. The sensible one. Again, for the 1000th time. I could just close the laptop, absorb the slight, and maintain the fragile peace. I looked from a photo of the boy who trusted me to the laptop screen offering an escape. And I realized the truth. The bridge wasn't mine to burn. It was already a pile of ashes. They had torched it the moment they sent that text. All I was doing was deciding whether or not to stand in the smoke and pretend it was still there. What was I really holding on to? Not the boy in the picture. He was long gone. I was holding on to a role I had been assigned, a role I had played so well that I had forgotten it was a performance. The responsible brother, the safety net, the fixer. A cold resolve settled over me. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a resignation. I was resigning from my unpaid, unappreciated, lifelong position in the family. I placed the photo frame face down on the bookshelf. I walked back to the laptop, my steps now firm, deliberate. I moved the cursor. The click of the trackpad was the only sound in the room. It was sharp. It was final. The confirmation page loaded. Your trip to Costa Rica is booked. It felt less like a victory and more like a verdict. The transition was jarring. One day, I was in the sterile quiet of my apartment. The next, I was in the humid, chaotic symphony of one Santa Maria airport. The air was thick with the scent of jet fuel, damp earth, and something sweet I couldn't name. It was overwhelming. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, a longing for the predictable quiet I'd just abandoned. Then I saw him, a man holding a sign with my name on it. He smiled, took my bag, and led me to a sleek, black SUV where a chilled bottle of water and a cool towel were waiting. The regret vanished, replaced by a novel sensation, being prioritized. As we drove out of the city and towards the coast, the urban sprawl gave way to lush, green hillsides. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching a world I'd only ever seen in magazines scroll by. I thought about what was happening back home. The frantic preparations, the seating charts, the arguments over floral arrangements. It all felt very, very far away. My phone buzzed. A text from my aunt. Your mother is worried sick. What's going on? I looked at the text, then out at the verdant landscape. I pulled up the photo gallery on my phone, selected a picture I'd taken from the first-class lounge, my legs stretched out, a glass of champagne in hand. I posted it to my rarely used Instagram account. The caption took a moment to compose. I didn't want it to be overtly angry. I wanted it to be dismissive, recalculating my portfolio of personal investments. Some assets are proving to be non-performing. I hit post and then switched my phone to airplane mode. The buzz of the virtual world was replaced by the real-world buzz of cicadas in the trees lining the road. The resort was less a building and more a part of the landscape. Open-air architecture, towering palms growing through the lobby, and the constant, soothing sound of the ocean. I was greeted with a cocktail before I even reached the check-in desk. My suite was absurd. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto a private balcony that felt suspended over the jungle canopy, with the Pacific glittering in the distance. I dropped my bags, walked out onto the balcony, and just breathed. The air was clean, salty, and alive. The next few days were a lesson in intentional emptiness. I did nothing, and I did it with purpose. I woke when the sun, not my alarm, told me to. I read books that had been gathering dust on my nightstand for years. I went for long, aimless walks on the black sand beach, letting the waves wash over my feet, feeling the primal pull of the tide. I was learning to exist outside of my designated role. Here, I wasn't the responsible one. I was just Julian. On the third evening, I was at the resort's open-air bar, nursing a local beer and watching the sky bleed into shades of orange and purple. Most of the other patrons were couples, holding hands, whispering. I didn't feel lonely, just separate. A solo traveler as well, I see. The voice was warm, with a hint of an East Coast accent. I turned. A woman, perhaps in her early 60s, with elegant silver hair and intelligent, dark eyes, gestured to the empty stool beside me. She was chic in a way that seemed effortless. "Is it that obvious?" I asked with a small smile. "Only to one of us," she said, sliding onto the stool. "It takes one to know one. I'm Isabella." "Julian," I said. "Nice to meet you." We fell into easy conversation. She was from Philadelphia, recently retired, and on the third leg of a 6-month journey through Central America. She was witty, well-traveled, and had a way of looking at you that felt like she was reading the footnotes of your life story. For the first time in what felt like years, I had a conversation with someone who had no preconceived notions of who I was supposed to be, and it was intoxicating. "So, Julian the risk analyst," Isabella said on our second evening of sharing the sunset at the bar. She swirled the ice in her glass, the setting sun glinting off her rings. "What brings you here? You don't strike me as the type to take an impromptu, tropical vacation." Her perception was unnerving. I had a sudden opening in my schedule. I said, the corporate euphemism tasting like ash in my mouth. Isabella raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "An opening in your schedule," she repeated slowly, savoring the absurdity. "That sounds like something you say when a business deal falls through. Or a wedding." I must have flinched because a knowing, not unkind, smile touched her lips. "Ah, a wedding." She took a sip of her drink. "Yours?" "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "My brother's." I hadn't planned on telling her or anyone, but sitting there in the warm Costa Rican twilight with this kind, perceptive stranger, the story just spilled out. I told her about Marcus, the business, the loan, the text message, the phone call with my mother. I didn't embellish. I laid the facts out like I was presenting a case file, a habit for my job. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, simply watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. "So," she finally said, her voice soft, "the prodigal son returns, and the faithful son is sent to the fields. It's a tale as old as time." She looked at me directly. "And let me guess, you're here posting pictures of your fabulous trip to make them all see what a mistake they made. To make them jealous." Her directness was a punch to the gut. I felt a flush of defensive anger. "It's more complicated than that," I mumbled, sounding like a sulking teenager. "Is it?" she countered, her gaze unwavering. "Or is it just that simple? You've been wounded, so you want to wound them back. It's human, but it's also a trap." She leaned forward slightly, her expression turning serious. "I was married for 35 years to a man I adored. And for 35 years, I was his support system, his cheerleader, his planner, his everything. When he left me for a woman half my age, the rage I felt was biblical. I wanted to burn his world to the ground." She paused, looking out at the now dark ocean. "And for a while I tried. Petty revenges, angry emails. It was exhausting. It was like drinking poison and waiting for him to die." She turned back to me, her eyes locking onto mine. "Revenge is a cocktail that tastes sweet for a minute but gives you a hangover for a year. It keeps you tethered to the very people you're trying to escape. So let me ask you this, Julian." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "What are you really thirsty for? Vengeance or freedom? Because they are not the same thing." The question hung in the air between us, heavy and profound. Vengeance or freedom? I had come here thinking they were a package deal. I believed that my freedom would be earned through their suffering, their regret. But Isabella's words presented a different path, one I hadn't even considered. A path that wasn't about them at all. A path that was just about me. I had no answer for her. But the question followed me back to my room, echoing in the sound of the crashing waves, keeping me awake long into the night. The day of the wedding arrived. I knew this not because I was tracking it, but because a strange, anticipatory silence seemed to have fallen over my phone. The angry, guilt-tripping texts from my parents had ceased. There was nothing from my cousins, not even my usually chatty aunt. It was an unnerving quiet, the calm before a storm. I resolved to ignore it. I followed Isabella's advice and chose freedom. I spent the day on a guided hike deep into the rainforest. I saw monkeys chattering in the canopy, a vibrant blue morpho butterfly fluttering across the path, and a sloth moving with a meditative slowness that I envied. For hours, I was completely disconnected, my world reduced to the crunch of my boots on the trail and the humid scent of the jungle. When I returned to the resort late in the afternoon, sunburned and tired, I felt a sense of peace. I had survived the day. Then I connected my phone to the resort's Wi-Fi. It was like a dam breaking. A flood of notifications, dozens of them poured in, making my phone vibrate so violently it nearly skittered off the table. Missed calls, voicemails, a tidal wave of text messages. The names were a frantic roll call of my entire extended family. Mom, Dad, Aunt Carol, Cousin Jake. But it was the one name I hadn't expected to see that made my blood run cold. Uncle Gene. Uncle Gene was my father's older brother, a retired carpenter and a man of few words. He viewed family drama with the same disdain he reserved for particle board. He never got involved. If he was calling me, something was fundamentally broken. I ignored the cacophony of other messages and dialed his number. He answered before the first ring finished. Julian, he said, his voice rough with something I couldn't identify. Thank God. Are you okay? I'm fine, Uncle Gene. I'm away. What's going on? Is everyone all right? He let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like sandpaper. That's a matter of opinion, kid. Listen to me. Whatever you're feeling right now, don't you dare feel guilty. You hear me? You dodged a bullet. No, you dodged a goddamn nuclear warhead. What are you talking about? I asked, my heart starting to pound. The wedding. The wedding, he scoffed. There is no wedding. It's over. The whole thing it went up in flames. Right there, in the middle of the reception, a complete and utter disaster. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my legs suddenly weak. What happened? Gene took a deep breath. The ceremony went off, apparently. But at the reception, it was time for the best man's speech. Marcus's old college buddy, Kevin. Kid was always a loudmouth. He gets up there, clearly had a few too many, and starts this rambling toast. And then he says it. He raises his glass and says, "And here's to Brianna, who makes Marcus so happy. He doesn't even mind that she was sleeping with her yoga instructor for the past 6 months." The line went silent. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. You can imagine what happened next. Gene continued, his voice grim. Total chaos. Brianna tried to laugh it off, said it was a joke. But the look on her face, everyone knew. Marcus just snapped. He wasn't yelling, it was worse. He was dead quiet. He looked at her, then at the best man, and then at the whole room. He dropped his champagne glass on the floor, turned around, and just walked out. Didn't say a word. Walked right out of the reception, got in his car, and drove off. I was speechless, staring at the wall. It was a meltdown of epic proportions, Gene said. Brianna started screaming, throwing things. Her mother and your mother got into a shouting match. Your father and Brianna's dad almost came to blows over who was going to pay the venue. It was the ugliest thing I've ever seen. They had to shut down the bar. He paused. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, stay there. You made the right call, kid. You have no idea. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. I felt a dizzying, terrifying wave of nothing, a profound emptiness. The drama I had been excluded from had imploded so spectacularly that it had ceased to exist. And in its place was a quiet, gaping void. Isabella's words came back to me. Vengeance or freedom? Staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone, I realized the universe had just given me both, and I had no idea how to feel about it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I scrolled through the frantic text messages, each one a snapshot of the escalating chaos. Mom, Julian, please answer. Your brother is destroyed. He needs you. You have to come home and fix this. Cousin Jake, dude, you're not going to believe what just happened. Call me. Dad, your mother is a mess. Call her. Then, a text from a number I didn't recognize, which I assumed was Brianna using someone else's phone. This is your fault. If you had been here, this never would have happened. You poisoned him against me. I almost laughed at the sheer audacity. They had cast me out, and now, in their desperation, they were recasting me, either as the savior or the villain, whichever role suited their narrative in the moment. I was a ghost haunting a catastrophe I wasn't even invited to. I put my phone on silent and walked out to my balcony. The jungle was alive with a nightly chorus of insects and frogs. The air was cool. The world was indifferent. I took a deep breath, trying to anchor myself in the reality of my location, so far from the wreckage. I thought I had achieved a state of detached peace until the next morning. I woke up, ordered room service, and saw a notification on my phone that I had missed overnight. A single voicemail. From Marcus. It was time-stamped at 3:15 a.m. My first instinct was to delete it. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his blame, his manufactured regret. But curiosity, that morbid human impulse, got the better of me. I took a sip of my strong Costa Rican coffee, pressed play, and put the phone to my ear. The sound was distorted, muffled, thick with alcohol. It was the unmistakable sound of a man who had hit rock bottom. "Jules," he slurred, his voice cracking. "You there? Of course you're not. You're somewhere smart. You were always the smart one." There was a long pause, filled with the sound of clinking ice and a ragged sigh. "I messed up, man," he whispered, his voice thick with self-pity. "I messed up so bad. It's all gone. All of it." I waited for the blame, for the part where he would say it was my fault for not being there to stop him, to fix it. But it never came. "You want to know the real reason?" He continued, his voice dropping even lower. "The real reason you weren't on the list? It wasn't the budget. It wasn't the cuts. It was me. All me." He took a shaky breath. "It was Brianna. She was scared of you, man. She said you look at people like you're auditing their soul. That you'd see right through her. That you'd know she wasn't good enough. She said you try to talk me out of it, try to protect me like you always do." Another long, painful pause. And I knew she was right. He finally choked out, the words dissolving into a sob. "I knew you'd see it. And I was a coward. I was so damn happy, Jules. I didn't want to see it. It was easier to push you away than to face the truth. It was easier to cut you out than to lose her. And now I've lost everything anyway." The voicemail ended with the sound of a muffled cry and then a click. I lowered the phone from my ear, my hand trembling. The coffee tasted bitter in my mouth. I had expected anger, excuses, manipulation. I was prepared for that. I was not prepared for this. Not for the pathetic, heartbreaking truth. He hadn't cut me out because he thought I was insignificant. He cut me out because he knew I was the most significant. I was the one person whose judgment he couldn't bear, the one mirror he couldn't face. The anger I'd been nursing for weeks evaporated, leaving something far more complicated in its wake. Disgust at his weakness, a deep, aching pity, and to my horror, a flicker of the old, familiar instinct. The urge to go to him, to fix it, to put the broken pieces of my little brother back together again. I felt a surge of revulsion, not at him, but at myself. At this conditioned response to be the family's emotional janitor. The feeling was so strong, so toxic, it almost made me gag. And in that moment of self-loathing, I finally understood. Isabella's question echoed in my mind. No longer a gentle philosophical query, but an urgent, flashing command. Vengeance or freedom? The voicemail had stripped away the last vestiges of vengeance. There was no satisfaction in kicking a man who was already lying broken in a ditch of his own digging. Kicking him would mean getting into the ditch with him, and I had just spent a week climbing out. What was left was the choice of freedom. And I now understood that freedom wasn't a destination. It was an action. It was a deliberate, conscious, and continuous severing of the ties that bound me to their chaos. My desire to fix him, that deeply ingrained instinct, was the last and strongest tie. It had to be cut. My hands were steady as I picked up my phone. The path forward was no longer murky. It was illuminated by a harsh, cold clarity. I opened my laptop. My return flight was scheduled for the end of the week. With a few clicks, I moved it. Another full week. The expense was considerable, but it felt like the best money I had ever spent. It was the price of my own liberation. Then, I opened my messaging app. I created a new group chat. The recipients: Mom, Dad, Marcus. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen, composing my final statement. There was no anger in the words, no spite. There was only the calm, irrefutable finality of a closed account. I have received everyone's messages and voicemails. It's clear you are all dealing with the consequences of your own choices. I trust you will handle it. I've decided to extend my state of focus on my own well-being. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification. I read it over once, then hit send. I didn't wait for the read receipts. My thumb hovered over my mother's name in my contact list. For a moment, I saw her face, worried and overbearing. I saw my father, silent and disappointed. I saw Marcus, the gap-toothed kid on my shoulders. A pang of loss, real and sharp, shot through me. This was the amputation. It was going to hurt. But the alternative was letting the gangrene spread. I pressed block this caller. A confirmation popped up. I pressed block again. One by one, I went down the list. My mother, my father, my aunt, my cousins, everyone who had been a party to the guilt and the silence. The last name was Marcus. I looked at it for a long time. Then, I pressed the button. The list of blocked numbers was long. It was a digital graveyard of my old life. I closed the phone and placed it face down on the nightstand. A profound silence filled the room. It was different from the quiet of my apartment. That was a silence of control, of order. This was a silence of release. It was the quiet of a ship that has finally cut the anchor and is drifting out into the open sea. It was terrifying, and it was free. The second week in Costa Rica was different from the first. The first had been an escape, a reaction. The second was a beginning. I didn't spend it lounging by the pool or distracting myself with tours. I spent it getting to know the person I was without the constant weight of my family's expectations. Myself. I hiked. I read. I had several more long, philosophical dinners with Isabella before she departed for Panama, leaving me with her email address and a piece of parting advice. Don't just build a new life, Julian. Build a better one. When I finally boarded the plane home, I felt like a different man. The anger had been scoured out of me, replaced by a calm, settled quiet. I was no longer running from something. I was returning to something new. The door to my apartment opened with a familiar click, but the space inside felt foreign. It was the home of the man I used to be, a place of rigid order designed to keep chaos at bay. I now realized it had also been a cage. That weekend, I bought boxes. I started packing, not with the frantic energy of an escape, but with the deliberate care of an archivist. I was curating the life I wanted to keep and boxing up the one I was leaving behind. I found a framed photo of me and Marcus. I looked at it for a long time, at the two boys who knew nothing of loans and betrayals. I felt a sad, distant affection for them. I wrapped the frame in bubble wrap and placed it gently inside a box I labeled history. I wasn't erasing it. I was just putting it on the proper shelf. An email from Uncle Gene arrived a few days later. It was short and to the point. Julian, hope you got back okay. Things here are a mess. Marcus is living at your parents' house. Brianna is gone. Her family is threatening to sue him for the wedding costs. To cover the deposits and penalties, Marcus had to liquidate a chunk of his stock. Caused a panic with his investors. The company is on shaky ground. Your parents are walking on eggshells. Don't know what else to say. It's a sorry state of affairs. Gene, I read the email and felt nothing. It was like reading a case study about a failed company. An unfortunate outcome, but one whose risks had been clear from the start. It had nothing to do with me anymore. I closed the email and continued to pack. They found me, of course. A week later, as I was loading the last of the boxes into a moving van, a familiar car pulled up to the curb. My parents. They got out and stood on the sidewalk, looking smaller and older than I remembered. My mother's face was a mask of strained composure. My father just looked tired, his shoulders slumped. Julian, my mother said, her voice trembling slightly. You didn't tell us you were moving. It didn't seem necessary. I said, my tone even neutral. I didn't stop my work, simply hefted another box. We need to talk, my father said, his voice raspy. This has gone on long enough. We need to fix this. I stopped and turned to face them fully. I leaned against the side of the van, crossing my arms. The conversation I had been dreading was here, but the fear was gone. There's nothing to fix, I said quietly. There is only what happened. And what happens next? We're your family. My mother pleaded, taking a step forward. Your brother. He's a wreck. Julian. He needs you. He needs his big brother. I held up a hand, and she stopped. You've always praised me for being responsible, I said, my voice calm, but hard as steel. So you should appreciate this. I am finally taking full responsibility for my own life, for my own peace. That is my priority now. What about your brother? My father asked, his voice cracking with a frustration he couldn't contain. Are you just going to throw him away? I looked my father in the eye. I signed a business contract with him, I stated, letting each word land. A contract for $150,000. I am a man of my word, and I will continue to honor the legal terms of that document until he is satisfied. I paused, letting the weight of my next word settle. But our personal relationship was also an investment. It was an investment of trust, of loyalty, of faith. An investment I made over and over again with no return. And as a risk analyst, I can tell you that you never continue to pour resources into a failing asset. I stood up straight. That investment is now in default. The account is closed. My mother let out a small sob. My father just stared, his face ashen. They had no response. The language of business, the world of cold, hard facts, was the one language they couldn't argue with because they had been the ones to accuse me of living in it. I have to go, I said, turning back to the van. I have to return the keys. I didn't look back as I closed the rear door of the van. I didn't need to. I had drawn the final, absolute boundary, and I was finally on the right side of it. 6 months later, the sun is streaming through the window of a new apartment. It's smaller than my old place, in a part of the city I'm still learning. The walls are still mostly bare, and there are boxes I haven't gotten around to unpacking. But it feels more like home than the old place ever did. I'm on my small balcony, a mug of coffee warming my hands. It's Saturday. My calendar is empty. My phone is silent. This quiet used to unnerve me. Now it's a luxury. I don't feel a sense of triumph. I don't feel happy in the loud, celebratory way people expect. What I feel is a sense of peace. A low, steady hum of contentment that I earned at a very high price. I lost a part of my family to find a part of myself. It's a scar I'll carry, a faint ache that reminds me of the amputation. But the wound is no longer open. The bleeding has stopped. Sometimes I think about Marcus. I hope he figures it out. I hope he learns to stand on his own 2 feet without needing someone to prop him up or someone to blame. I hope this for him from a great, insurmountable distance. I take a sip of my coffee. The city hums below me, a world of infinite possibilities and manageable risks. For the first time in my life, I'm not looking at the ledger of the past. I'm looking at the blank page of the future. And whatever comes next, the risk, the reward, the profit, and the loss, it will be mine and mine alone.